The desert at night is supposed to be silent. A black horizon, cold air, the sound of engines carrying men towards something they can't yet see. But on March 20th, 2003, silence was torn apart. The sky above Baghdad lit up like noon. Cruise missiles arced across the heavens, their trails burning lines of white fire against the black. The first waves of shock and awe slammed into the city, and for miles across the sand, the thunder reached us. The ground shook as though the desert itself was warning us. You're walking into history now. I was with a small mechanized platoon 4 Humvees, a Bradley, and a handful of attachments, a combat engineer, a medic everyone just called Doc, and enough nerves to power a city. For the generals, this was a campaign. For us, it was headlights in the dark, waiting for orders. Inside the Humvee, life narrowed, weapons checked, water bottles rattled, dust settling on every surface. Logistics was its own kind of war fuel. Filters, maps, batteries. You learn quickly that war isn't only bullets, it's the constant fight against running dry. The psychology of waiting eats men alive. Our driver, Private Lewis, barely 20, kept tapping the wheel, his knee bouncing. Feels like we're about to drive into the end of the world, he muttered. Staff Sergeant Hale, our platoon leader, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Eyes forward, Lewis. The end of the world isn't on the map. Baghdad is. In the back, Corporal Ramirez, our gunner, full of sarcasm, broke the tension. Relax, kid. Worst case, you get a free trip home in a flag-draped limo. Dark humor, the soldier's medicine. When we finally rolled forward, it wasn't with glory, it was with grit. The desert played its tricks, sudden halts, convoys stretching miles, engines overheating, radios spitting static. The heat of day, the chill of night, and always the dust, the fine powder that clogged filters, lungs, and tempers alike. Then came the first false alarm. The column slowed, word passed down, possible contact. No one panicked. Weapons rose, sectors locked, fingers rested on triggers but didn't twitch. Minutes stretched like hours, nothing moved, nothing came. Hale's voice crackled over comms. Stay tight. Don't chase ghosts. That was leadership, not fireworks, but calm when everyone else wanted to flinch. Later, the desert turned against us in a different way. A sandstorm rolled in fast, an orange wall swallowing the horizon. Within minutes, visibility dropped to nothing. The world became static and grit. No headlights, no stars, just checklist discipline. Drivers followed taillights they could barely see. Gunners stayed low. Radios buzzed with clipped confirmations. It wasn't courage that kept us moving. It was routine. Hours later, when the storm broke and the sky cleared, Baghdad still burned in the distance. The night had ended, but for us, it was only the beginning. As dawn crawled over the desert, someone whispered what we were all thinking. Next stop, the city. And in that silence, we all understood the real decisions, the real price were waiting inside those streets. The road looked empty, which meant it was already occupied. That was the joke Ramirez made as we pushed north, our convoy snaking across cracked highways and dirt paths that had seen better centuries. Iraq wasn't just desert, it was contradictions. A stretch of nothing, then suddenly a cluster of houses, a market stall, or a gas station that hadn't pumped fuel in years. The deeper we moved, the more the road itself felt like an enemy. Heat shimmered off the asphalt, hiding shapes that might or might not be threats. Locals appeared at the roadside, some waving, some staring blankly, some disappearing inside as we passed. We learned fast. The way people moved told you more than any map. A child waving meant calm. A crowd that suddenly vanished meant ambush. The first real contact came at midday. A burst of gunfire rattled out of an alleyway, sharp and close. No grand firefight, just an ambush, sudden and ugly. Ramirez's 50 cal answered in seconds, stitching the source with bursts. Smoke canisters hissed, masking the convoy. Doc Simmons dragged a man down from a Humvee roof, bandaging a graze before the dust even settled. The fight lasted less than a minute, but the silence after felt heavier than the noise. We'd been tested, and we'd answered. Urban ground is different. Every street is a question mark, every balcony a possible firing line. Hale drilled us on reading the terrain, check rooftops, watch shadows under cars, corners of markets, blind intersections. The city wasn't just a backdrop, it was a player, and it played for keeps. Then came the map mistake. The route we were given ended in a barricade concrete blocks stacked across the road. The convoy stretched, impatient, exposed. Hale made the call. Ramirez, Lewis, you're up. Take us through the alleys. Lewis swallowed hard, then threaded a Humvee into streets that barely fit us. Walls brushed our mirrors. Windows hung inches from our rifles. Every corner could have been the last. But he kept steady, following Hale's calm directions. By the time we rejoined the main road, the platoon had learned something. Trust isn't a word, it's a survival skill. There were human moments, too. A shopkeeper on a corner gestured at us, palm flat, motioning, "Stop." No common language, just instinct. Hale froze the column. 30 seconds later, a motorcycle carrying 2 armed men tore past the next block. We didn't fire. We didn't have to. Reading intent kept us alive. That night, we took shelter in a half-collapsed warehouse, the corrugated roof rattling with every gust. Engines cooled, weapons were cleaned, filters unclogged. Ramirez cursed at his coffee kit, half filled with sand instead of grounds. The platoon laughed, because sometimes the only way to fight fear is to laugh at something else. By dawn, orders came. Faster movement. Sectors were being divided, the city broken down into assignments. Ours was the southern approaches to the capital. Baghdad was no longer a horizon, it was a destination. And every man knew, the closer you get, the tighter the noose. They told us, go in, make a loop, and come back out. What they didn't say was that the city might decide to keep us. April 2003. By then, Baghdad wasn't just a name on the map. It was a shadow on the horizon, pulling us forward mile by mile. The orders were simple on paper. A thunder run. A high-speed armored push deep into the city to test defenses, to shake the regime, to let the people know the end was coming. Simple on paper. In reality, it meant driving into the heart of a hornet's nest with just enough fuel, just enough ammo, and no guarantee of coming back. The first thing that hit wasn't enemy fire, it was sound. Engines roared in unison, steel tracks grinding asphalt. The city swallowed us whole. Streets funneled noise into echo chambers. Every corner, every arch threw back our presence like thunder. The banners of Saddam, ripped and fraying, slapped in the wind. Abandoned buses lay across boulevards, makeshift barricades daring us to pass. Then came the bottleneck. One of those wide avenues pinched into a narrow point, hemmed in by buildings on both sides. Gunfire erupted, not from one angle but 2 street level and rooftops. Bullets clawed sparks from armor, rockets streaked overhead. Hale's voice cut through the chaos, calm, clipped, surgical. Ramirez, pin that left. Lewis, angle right. Keep moving, don't stall. One Humvee drew the fire, hosing down windows with suppressive bursts. Another cut across, changing the angle, forcing the shooters to split. Simmons dragged a wounded Iraqi civilian behind cover, then was back on his rifle without missing a beat. It wasn't heroics. It was rhythm, each man falling into a role, like an old song with deadly lyrics. The crew worked like a machine. The gunner reloaded without looking. The loader fed belts with bleeding fingers. The commander kept his head above the hatch just long enough to read the next threat. Discipline held the line where adrenaline could have shattered it. And still, the city watched. At one point we passed a courtyard, green against the dust, where an old man stood holding the hand of a boy. Both raised their arms, palms open. Hale made a decision in a breath. We rolled past without slowing, without firing. Not every raised hand was a threat. Not every shadow was an enemy. Then came the ambush in the archway. Fire erupted from a cross street we hadn't cleared. Tracers lit the dark like claws. For a moment, the convoy was in a kill box. Ramirez cursed, threw smoke, and Lewis cut hard left, finding a path between wrecked cars. A sapper rigged a quick block with explosives, sealing the arch behind us. Improvisation beat planning. Again. Minutes stretched into hours. We punched through intersections, crossed bridges, rattled over broken pavement. By the time we pulled back out, dust-covered and deafened, the radio crackled with the roll call. Hale up! Ramirez up! Lewis up! Simmons up! Each answer was short, almost casual, but every man knew what it meant. Alive, still moving. Relief came, but not celebration. The city hadn't broken us, but it hadn't surrendered either. It had memorized our faces, our vehicle numbers, our tactics. Next time, it would be ready. And next time, we'd have to be sharper, faster, harder. They say the first time you knock on the door, the second time you walk inside. April 2003. The order came down clear. Another thunder run. But this time it wasn't a probe. It wasn't about rattling cages. This time we were told to drive deeper, hold ground, seize key intersections and government complexes. Baghdad wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a fight waiting at every corner. Engines growled to life before dawn. The column moved out, steel and dust blending into the rising sun. Nobody said it, but we all knew. The first run had been a warning shot. The second was a declaration. The city met us with silence first. Too quiet. Streets littered with burnt cars, posters half-hanging from walls, checkpoints abandoned in a hurry. Hale's voice was steady on the net. Don't trust the quiet. Eyes up. Sectors locked. Then the trap was sprung. Gunfire ripped out from 3 angles. Muzzle flashes from alleyways, rooftops, even a schoolyard. But it wasn't chaos for long. Ramirez spotted the diversion. Front fire was loud, but thin. The real punch came from the flank, a heavier volley hammering us from the left. Lewis pivot right, cut the angle. Ramirez, burn that flank down. It was a split-second call, but it kept the column alive. One Humvee swung wide, its gunner stitching arcs across windows, while another squad lanced through the alley, clearing it room by room. The city wanted us tangled. Hale's discipline kept us moving. We pushed deeper. Government buildings loomed gray, blocky, scarred with shell impacts. These weren't symbols anymore. They were targets. Abrams tanks fired round after round, their shockwaves turning glass into powder. Sappers marked safe lanes with spray paint and hand signals, guiding the column through intersections littered with abandoned taxis and barricades. At one point, the city tried a different tactic: emptiness. A wide boulevard stretched ahead, no movement, no fire. Too clean. Every instinct screamed trap. Hale's call came. Short bounds, cover arcs, nobody relaxes. Sure enough, as the third vehicle crossed mid-street, an RPG streaked from a hidden corner. It slammed into a bus instead of steel, the explosion echoing down the boulevard. Simmons dragged a shaken driver from his seat, slapped him back into rhythm. No panic, just work. Hour by hour, the city's resistance cracked. Less coordinated fire, more sporadic bursts. Militias broke into smaller bands, sniping and running. The iron grip of the regime was loosening, and you could feel it in the air. And then, something new. Civilians, first cautious, then bolder. A woman peeking through a shattered doorway, a man waving a white cloth, a boy carrying a jug of water. Fear and hope mixed on their faces. We weren't liberators in their eyes, not yet. We were armed men in their streets. But the tide had shifted. Baghdad was no longer only a battlefield. It was a place people wanted to survive again. The moment of truth came in the late afternoon. Gunfire sputtered out, replaced by silence, broken only by engines and the clatter of gear. Soldiers looked at each other, waiting for the next ambush that never came. Hale lowered his binoculars, voice low but firm. "That's it. They're breaking. Stay sharp. This city isn't ours. It's just no longer theirs." By nightfall, Baghdad had changed hands. Not officially, not yet. But in spirit, the regime's hold had snapped. Still, nobody celebrated, because every man knew the hardest battles aren't always fought with bullets, and every man knew the city without a master could be more dangerous than one that fights. Baghdad was alive again, but it wasn't the same city anymore. The morning after felt unreal. The thunder had stopped, and in its place came a silence that carried weight. Not peace, just the absence of fire. The streets were torn open, buildings slouched like weary men, and the air held the iron taste of smoke and dust. We rolled through intersections blackened by burned-out trucks. Market stalls stood abandoned, fruit rotting in the sun. A toppled statue lay across the road, its face cracked, its pedestal empty. History had fallen with it, and now the question was what would rise in its place. Locals emerged cautiously. A man with tired eyes held his daughter close as we passed. An old woman shuffled forward with a jug of water, offering it to our convoy without a word. Gratitude, fear, confusion, all mixed together in gestures too fragile to misread. But if the people were cautious, so were we. Victory doesn't erase danger. Every rooftop could hide a rifle, every alley an ambush. Discipline mattered more than firepower now. Hale's words cut through the radio like a mantra. Trigger discipline, heads clear. We don't win by pulling fast, we win by holding steady. The city tested us in new ways. On one market street, movement sparked tension. A group of men shouted in Arabic, waving their arms, fingers hovered near triggers. Then a child ran out, clutching bread. Just bread. Nobody fired, no mistakes. A wrong shot would have killed more than a boy, it would have killed trust. That night we bivouacked in a half-destroyed hangar. Lewis wrestled with a busted water filter, cursing under his breath, until Ramirez dropped a one-liner that had the whole squad laughing, sand and all. Humor was the antidote to exhaustion, proof that we were still human. In quieter moments, the weight settled in. Simmons cleaned his kit in silence, hands moving with the precision of a man who had seen too much blood already. Hale sat with a map on his knees, not looking at it, just holding it, as if the paper itself carried the burden of decisions past and those still to come. The truth was clear. We had broken the city's defenses, but we hadn't ended the war. Baghdad was only the first chapter. At dawn, we moved again. A child offered Lewis a flask of water. The same soldier who had barely spoken the entire operation smiled, a small, fragile smile, but real. It was the first sign that the fight hadn't hollowed him out completely. And in that moment, something became clear. Victory wasn't the explosion of a regime collapsing. Victory was the discipline to keep your weapon down when you could raise it. The strength to protect instead of destroy. When we finally pulled out, the streets were still scarred, the people still wary. We would leave. They would stay. And that was the heavier burden. As the convoy rolled toward the horizon, Hale's voice carried one last thought. The fall of a regime takes a moment. What comes after takes years. Remember that. The city faded behind us, not conquered, not saved, just changed. And for us, the war was far from over.